Thanks for joining, everyone. I'm just going to give it one more minute for others to hop on, and then we'll get started. All right, it is officially 6, so I'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining tonight. For the Oregon's Marine Mammals webcast, my name is Allie Fisher, and I'll be your MC for tonight. I'm the Wildlife and Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Associate for Oregon Wild. Tonight, I am honored to introduce our guest, Dr. Lisa T. Ballance, who is the Director of Oregon State University's Marine Mammal Institute, Endowed Chair of Marine Mammal Research, and Professor of Fisheries, Wildlife, and Conservation Sciences. Prior to joining OSU's Marine Mammal Institute, Dr. Ballance directed NOAA's Marine Mammal and Turtle Research Division, was also Chief Scientist of NOAA's Eastern Tropical Pacific Dolphin Research Program, which provided the scientific basis for the Dolphin Safe label found on tuna cans in supermarkets all over the country. Dr. Ballance holds a PhD in marine ecology, an MS in marine science, and a BS in biology. She has studied the ecology and conservation biology of whales, dolphins, and porpoises, and seabirds for over 30 years around the world, and has published more than 130 scientific papers, book chapters, and technical reports. While we're here, I would also like to include a land acknowledgement in this space. I would like to offer gratitude to the land itself and for those who have lived here in Oregon since time immemorial. I would also like to acknowledge the continuing presence of Indigenous peoples on the land today. However, it must be noted that this brief acknowledgement can in no way capture the vast complexity and nuance that surrounds the history of tribes, the history between them and the federal government and individual states, as well as historical events, including colonial legacies and wrongdoings like forced removal that have had long-lasting and current impacts. That being said, the most important thing to do is not only acknowledge Indigenous people and the land, but continue to do meaningful work by supporting them in the present, respecting and uplifting tribal sovereignty during your research and taking action. Additionally, a recording of this program will be emailed out tomorrow and will be posted on our website, oregonwild.org, in the Wild blog. Please enter your questions at any time in the Q&A. We usually do get a flood of questions near the end of the presentation, so the sooner you can get yours in, the easier it will be for me to organize and answer them after our guest has finished presenting. Lastly, make sure to sign up for our next webinar about the belted kingfisher with author Marina Ritchie. Now I'll go ahead and pass it off to Dr. Ballance.
Thank you, Allie. All right. Thank you again for that introduction, Allie, and for the invitation. And I really appreciate all of you being here in the audience. And thanks for your time and joining me. It's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to talk about one of my favorite subjects, Oregon's marine mammals. As Ali mentioned, I'm a professor at Oregon State University and also a very proud director of OSU's Marine Mammal Institute. And before I talk about marine mammals, I want to take just a few minutes to introduce you to the institute where I work and the research and scientists I oversee. Oregon State University's Marine Mammal Institute is located along the central coast of Oregon in Newport at the Hatfield Marine Science Center. Our mission is to integrate research, graduate education, and outreach to advance our knowledge of marine mammals, train the next generation of professionals, and engage with stakeholders to ensure that these animals and their ecosystems are always healthy. Everything we do is guided by our principles and goals: scientific rigor, basic research with strong links to real-world applications, community engagement, and making positive impacts ranging from local through to national and global scales. Now, without a doubt, the Marine Mammal Institute is a global center of excellence for marine mammal science. Our early and lasting science legacy is animal-borne tags, especially satellite tags placed on whales. And I'm going to run this animation on the right-hand side of your screen. You'll notice that this is a satellite image of the west coast of North America. You can see Baja, the Baja Peninsula of Mexico down there in the lower right, the west coast of north of the United States, of Canada, and the Alaska near the top there. And what you're seeing here in these white lines are the tracks of humpback whales. Each of those lines, which shows up as a colored line initially, is an individual whale that is carrying a satellite tag on it. The beginning of the colored lines are where the satellite tag was placed on each whale, and then those colored lines follow the whale as it moves across the eastern North Pacific. You can see Hawaii there in the center, where we placed a lot of tags on whales, as well as coastal Canada, where we placed quite a few. And as this animation runs from the year 2014 through 2019, those 5 years when we put our tags on the animals, you can see that there are migration corridors that become quite obvious. Truly, these animals move over ocean basin scales. Now, that technology was initiated by our former director, Bruce Mate, in the blue shirt there. Dr. Mate is still working with us half-time as an emeritus professor, and his satellite tracking technology has been passed to Professor Daniel Palacios, who is a relatively new professor with our institute. In addition to satellite tracking technology, we do a lot more. This is Professor Scott Baker, who runs our cetacean conservation and genomics laboratory. Scott and his postdocs and staff and graduate students use molecular genetics to provide insights into phylogenetic relationships and population structure of marine mammals. This is Professor Lee Torres, whose expertise is ecology, health, and space use overlap with humans. She focuses especially on large whales off the coast of Oregon here, especially gray whales, but she also conducts research on blue whales and other large baleen whales. This is Jim Rice. Jim responds to dead and live stranded marine mammals all up and down our Oregon coast and collects scientific data to improve our understanding of the causes for these strandings. In fact, he's the coordinator for the entire network of stranding response individuals all along Oregon. This is Professor Mauricio Cantor, who joined us just this past August. Mauricio's expertise is in behavioral ecology, and he is especially interested in interactions between different species of marine mammals that collaborate, as well as collaboration between dolphin species and populations and humans. This is Professor Kate Stafford, who joined us this past January. Her specialty is using passive acoustics to listen to marine mammals, especially those in high latitudes in both poles, the Arctic and Antarctica. And this is Professor Josh Stewart, who has just recently joined our institute this month. Josh studies marine mammal ecosystem interactions, and in particular is starting research along the California coast here, along the Oregon coast in the California Current, to look at how marine mammals may influence food webs. All told, in our institute, we are 7 professors and labs, the coordinator of the Oregon Marine Mammal Stranding Network, and 9 additional principal investigators conducting science locally and globally and everywhere in between on a variety of issues and species. We also have a thriving graduate student and postdoctoral community. We are currently 17 master's and doctorate students and 6 postdoctorates, and increasing in numbers all the time. We have our own research vessel, the Pacific Storm. I'll tell you a lot more about the Pacific Storm in a few minutes. And we have a fleet of small boats. This is an aerial view of Ruby on the left. She's a rigid hulled inflatable boat. She's got an aluminum hull and an inflatable pontoons, thus the name rigid hulled inflatable boats, or RIBs. And you can see Ruby is fairly close to a gray whale. That photograph was taken right off the coast here of Newport during the summer. We also have a number of other rigid hulled inflatable boats, or RIBs. My 3 favorites, in addition to Ruby, are prime rib, spare rib, and barbecue rib. And we have a relatively new building, the Gladys Valley Marine Studies building here on the Hatfield campus. It's a remarkable building. It's an impressive feat of engineering because this building was constructed in the tsunami inundation zone and designed to withstand an earthquake of force 9 and the ensuing wave that would hit our coast. That roof there is where almost 1,000 people can take shelter with food and warmth designed to keep all of those people alive for a week or more. The building itself, in addition to this impressive feat of engineering, has futuristic design and state-of-the-art technologies, as well as an innovation lab that is designed explicitly for creating new scientific equipment. And also, this is a public building where we hold public events, public meetings, and have displays. We have an impressive art showing here now. And for any of you who are relatively close to Newport, I give you an open invitation to come and visit us. In the context of the Marine Mammal Institute, this building represents the first consolidation of our institute since we were established in 2006. We are all located on the top floor of this building, and it's an unparalleled opportunity for new synergies within and external to our institute. No doubt, we do cool science. And here is Craig leaning out of the open door of a US Coast Guard helicopter as he takes photos and video of a school of Dall's porpoise and a whale coming to the surface. You can see that whale blow right there. That's a fin whale. And those smaller splashes are the Dall's porpoises. We conduct these weekly aerial surveys piggybacked aboard Coast Guard helicopter surveys to provide data on whale and dolphin abundance and distribution in Oregon waters. And this is science with impact. Whale entanglement in fishing gear here and elsewhere is a problem, and these data allow us to assess overlap between whales and fishing hotspots to actively minimize negative impacts on whales and on fisheries. Here's another example of our cool science. Seawater contains DNA from the animals that live there, including whales and dolphins. And we've developed a reference library of DNA sequences to identify even the world's rarest whale. That is cool science with impact. This environmental DNA, or eDNA as we call it, offers a powerful new approach to assess marine biodiversity and to better understand distribution of rare species just by collecting a jar of water. Here's a third example of cool science, using drones and underwater GoPro cameras to provide new perspectives on gray whale feeding behavior and shape. This is an aerial view of a gray whale off of our coast right here. And in a moment, we're going underwater now to give you a view of what the water column looks like for a gray whale. Pretty murky water. Oh, and there's a gray whale swimming by. These gray whales feed on benthic invertebrates and invertebrates in the water column. We're back up in the air now, and here is a drone's eye view. Here we're doing a flyover of a gray whale coming to the surface. We can take a photo of that gray whale at the surface and measure the gray whale quite precisely to see what body condition and shape it has. If you freeze that photograph, we can measure the animal's width and infer health and condition. And the impact is that we can link gray whale diet and health with data on ocean noise, prey abundance, and vessel traffic to allow for an improved understanding of the impacts of multiple stressors on this distinct population. My final example of cool science, and cool science with impact, is what I'm going to spend the rest of my time on. It's a deep dive into some recent research we conducted in search of cryptic species of whales and a mystery whale uncovered right here off the coast of Oregon. Now, when we think of whales, many of us think of animals like this one. This is a blue whale, the largest animal ever to have lived on the planet. Blue whales are increasing in numbers along the west coast of North America, including right here off Oregon. And those are bottlenose dolphins bow riding on the wave the whale is creating as it swims through the water. Here's another animal that comes to mind when we think of whales, the humpback whale. This photo from a drone shows 3 animals blowing bubbles as they swim in ever-tightening circles to herd small fish into a tight school, more efficient for feeding on them. Humpback whales are also common off the coast of Oregon. Especially for those of us in Oregon, when we think of whales, we often think of the gray whale. This mother-calf pair is migrating along the west coast from their breeding grounds in lagoons off Baja, California, Mexico, to their feeding grounds right offshore of Oregon and on up into Alaska. Sperm whales are another animal that comes to mind when we think of whales. Deep divers, feeding on squid, highly social, with lifespans paralleling humans. And of course, sperm whales are of Moby Dick fame. And finally, when we think of whales, how can we not think of what is perhaps the most recognizable large whale in the ocean, the killer whale? Highly social, pack hunters and predators of all things that swim in the oceans, even the largest of whales. Killer whales too frequent waters along our Oregon coast. But there's an entire family of whales in the world's oceans that many have never even heard of, and few have even seen. They are known as beaked whales of the family Ziphiidae. There are 23 species currently recognized in this group. They are found in all oceans of the world, from Arctic seas in the far north to the Southern Ocean that surrounds Antarctica, and everywhere in between. They're almost entirely found where the ocean is deep. Although small by whale standards, typically between about 15 and 40 feet long, they still weigh up to 12 tons, placing them among the largest 0.001% of all animals on Earth. There's a reason that these whales are best depicted as a group with this series of drawings. Of all the marine mammals, this is by far the most poorly known group. Let me tell you a little bit about what we do know about them. Beaked whales are what we call extreme divers. They dive for long periods of time and they dive to extreme depths. This is Cuvier's beaked whale. By placing satellite tags on animals of this species, we know they dive to almost 3,000 meters. That's just under 10,000 feet and equivalent to an 800-story building or about 7 Empire State Buildings tall. During these deep dives, these whales can remain underwater for as long as 2 hours and 17 minutes. Deep dives for long periods of time are characteristic of all beaked whales. Why dive so deep? This is the answer. Their favorite food is squid, and squid are abundant deep below the ocean's surface. In fact, at these depths, there is no light at all. These whales are feeding in complete darkness. They locate their prey not using vision, but using echolocation, producing sounds and listening to echoes as the sound waves reflect off of objects in the water, including squid. All beaked whales have extremely well-developed echolocation capabilities, and during their dives, they vocalize, produce echolocation clicks. They do this constantly. But when they come to the surface, they're silent, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Beaked whales have bizarre teeth. This is Blaineville's beaked whale. This animal is swimming to the left, and you can see its upper and lower jaws at the far left of this photograph. They form what we call the beak. Near the center of this photo are 2 protuberances. Those are teeth. There is only one tooth on each side of the head. Both teeth erupt from the lower jaw, which in this species forms an arch that reaches above the top of the skull. Most beaked whale species have this peculiar dentition, only 2 teeth and only in the lower jaw, one on each side. Every species of beaked whale has teeth that are different from all other species. Here you see drawings of the lower jaw of seven species. Those drawings are on the right. And on the left, a single drawing of the top view of a typical beaked whale skull. Going back to the right, you can clearly see that the size, shape, and placement of the teeth in the lower jaw are quite different. What do beaked whales use these teeth for? Not feeding. In fact, only adult males have teeth. Females remain toothless their entire lives. Males use these teeth to fight each other for access to breeding females. Although these battles have never been witnessed, they must be fierce, because when jousting males rake each other with their teeth, they sometimes leave deep, bleeding furrows along each other's bodies. This is another photo of Blaineville's beaked whale. This is a young male. Its teeth have not yet erupted from the lower jaw, but the parallel rake marks you can see on the right side of this photo were made by another male scraping its teeth along this animal's body. And by the way, those polka dots that you see are scars left by cookie cutter sharks. That's a story for a different time. This is what an older beaked whale looks like. This is southern bottlenose whale. And as you can see, this male has a lot of battle scars. And here is another Blaineville's beaked whale showing rake marks and deep furrowed scars from extremely aggressive encounters with other males. That's the left tooth that points up above the skull on the left side of this photo. And you can see that the right tooth is broken, probably from combat with another male. This is strap-toothed beaked whale. The teeth of males in this species grow over the top of the upper jaw, constraining it so that the mouth cannot open more than about an inch. The tooth I'm holding in the photo on the right shows the sharp denticle at the top that is used to gouge other males. Bizarre teeth indeed. One last general characteristic of beaked whales I want to mention is their behavior at the surface of the ocean. When beaked whales surface to breathe, they stop vocalizing several minutes and several hundred meters below the surface. Then, instead of coming straight up, they veer off in random directions. At the surface, beaked whales take a few quick gulps of air and then descend to several hundred meters for 10 minutes or more before they come to the surface again. They do a series of these relatively shallow breathing dives before they make their next deep foraging dive. Why this erratic and silent surfacing? Despite their size and deep and long dives, beaked whales are vulnerable to killer whales, the predatory kings of the ocean. There are records and even photos of killer whales attacking, killing, and eating beaked whales. So it's not surprising that beaked whales have evolved various behaviors that help them to minimize contact with killer whales. The less time beaked whales spend at the surface and the less noise they make, the less likely they are to attract bad company. This photo shows a Baird's beaked whale at the surface, and this enlargement reveals tooth rake scars on its dorsal fin left by an attacking killer whale. This whale got away, but Baird's beaked whales often have killer whale tooth rake marks on them, and we can assume that other whales are not so lucky. Little wonder beaked whales are wary of their time spent at the surface. And this includes their timidness around vessels. Typically, they slip below the surface shortly after being sighted. And typically, because of their long dives, they're not seen again. All of these factors, their oceanic distribution, small group sizes, deep and long dives, and silence and evasive behavior at the surface, all of these combine to make beaked whales the most poorly known family of all whales on the planet. Of the 23 known species of beaked whales, 5 have been added since the mid-1960s, and 6 beaked whale species have never been identified alive in the sea. They are known only from animals found on the beach, and 1 or more of these species could live in Oregon waters. So why care about beaked whales? 2 reasons. First, they represent a largely unknown part of the wondrous diversity of our oceans, and learning more about them is, to put it simply, awe-inspiring. But second, we humans are increasingly learning that beaked whales are vulnerable to all kinds of threats that we are creating. In particular, our oceans are extremely noisy places. They're noisy for lots of reasons, including sounds that we humans produce. Ship traffic, seismic testing for science purposes and for oil exploration, military use of high-intensity sonar to detect submarines, just a few examples. These sound sources have resulted in the deaths of untold numbers of beaked whales, apparently because a fright response to these loud sounds causes individuals in deep water to bolt to the surface. That can result in Benz-like symptoms for these whales and death. We know so very little about beaked whale numbers and distributions, even how many species there are. The ability to identify them to the species level using their recorded acoustic signals could make it possible to survey for these elusive animals just by listening for them using passive acoustic methods. With all of this in mind, I and colleagues put together an expedition with hopes to provide essential information to better understand beaked whales and to assess their vulnerabilities to human-caused sounds. Our explicit goal was to find one of these cryptic species and link its acoustic call with its visual characteristics. We were 12 strong, 7 scientists and 5 crew, setting sail for 30 days in the Pacific Ocean. So it was a sunny morning in early September of last year when, after a Herculean effort from science, ship, and shoreside teams, we left our Port Dock 3 on the bayfront here in Newport. A bustle of recreational boats heading out for a Saturday on the water were joined by common mer chicks calling for their fathers, pelagic cormorants commuting back from the sea with fish, and gulls tagging along with whatever looked interesting. We were on the Pacific Storm, built as a commercial trawler. She was donated to our institute and refitted as a research vessel. She's 84 feet long, and the crow's nest, where we plan to search for whales, is 25 feet above the sea. We were under blue skies and complete calm as we sailed under the iconic Yaquina Bay Bridge. Aboard, we had two critical, what I will call science powers, along with the world's best scientists in these two fields. First, we had the ability to listen to the ocean with an explicit focus on beaked whales. And here is Anna Maria at our Acoustics Control Center. She's listening to underwater sounds in real time, detected by a long cable containing underwater microphones known as hydrophones, towed behind our Pacific Storm. We use a variety of software tools to visualize these sounds because our human sense of vision is much better than our sense of hearing, unlike the beaked whales we were looking for. This is what Anna Maria is concentrating on. Our primary display is the top panel here. It consists of little dots, each representing a whale's echolocation click. Each color represents a different frequency. These dots scroll across the screen in real time from left to right, and they're visible for about 1 minute before they disappear off the screen to the right as new clicks continue to stream in from the left. Anna Maria can click her mouse on any dot she's interested in, and that produces the 3 diagnostic plots on the lower left that provide more information. These plots tell us about the time and location of the animal that produced them, and they give us clues about what species produced that click. Beaked whale clicks have a unique shape that you can see in the plot with the green background. The shape of the curve and placement of the peaks in the 2 plots to the left of the green one provide information that can, in some cases, help determine what species is making this click. This is Baird's beaked whale. We had an extraordinary encounter with them about 50 miles offshore of Central Oregon. Now remember, these whales are silent at the surface, but at depth, they vocalize. In the upper left-hand corner, I show you a sound clip that is recorded from this encounter. Now I'm going to play the sound in a moment, and I want you to watch the image scroll by as the sound plays. Each of those green lines is a click from a single whale. Beaked whales use these clicks to look for prey items, and each click presents them with a picture of their environment, much like sonar or radar. Here is that sound. Did you hear anything? Neither did I. Most marine mammals vocalize well outside of the range of human hearing. This is why we need so many displays to see this ultrasonic sound. Each display provides specific information about these vocalizations, maps indicating the location of the sounds, and forms for recording additional data. Now I'm going to play that same recording again, shown in the lower right here, slowed so that the frequency is more attuned to human ears. Listen for faint echolocation clicks like this. Still, beaked whale clicks are notoriously difficult to hear, so listen closely. Did you hear anything? If you did, you are likely to be young and you're likely to be female. And if we have time at the end of my talk, I'll explain why. Those were echolocation clicks of a Baird's beaked whale below the surface looking for squid. Our second key science power board are these 25 power by 150 binoculars. We mounted them on the crow's nest of the Pacific storm and used them to search the ocean all around us out to the horizon from sunup to sundown when sea conditions are allowed. And this photo was taken on a very fine day indeed. Remember, our goal was to link the distinctive vocalizations we were hearing from animals below the surface with their appearance once they came to the sea surface to breathe. We were particularly interested in the size of the animal, the shape and placement of the dorsal fin, the color and any patterning along the body, and especially, and if we were lucky enough to see an adult male, the teeth, their size, shape, and placement in the lower jaw. As you remember, females and subadults all tend to look alike. It is the adult males that have these species-specific characteristics of the teeth. It was September 22nd. We were about 200 nautical miles west of the Columbia River mouth. Anna Maria and Daniel were monitoring the sounds coming in from our hydrophone towed behind the Pacific storm. Our software was translating the inaudible ultrasonic signals into visual representations when the computer screen showed a type of beaked whale signal neither of them had ever seen before. Just 3 minutes later, the mystery whales stopped vocalizing. And Anna Maria knew exactly what that meant. Those whales would soon be coming to the sea surface. She immediately directed the captain to pilot our Pacific storm toward where she thought they might surface. Unfortunately, we had high winds that day and heavy seas, very poor sighting conditions. Nevertheless, all aboard were called to join the visual search from decks all around the boat above the cabins with what we expected was a very faint hope of finding the whales before their next dive. After 80 minutes of searching, this is what we saw. In the poor conditions, Todd, Craig, and Bob had their long lenses on their cameras and their motor drives were firing at full speed. Jay was on deck taking this video. We knew that at any moment the whales could dive or we would lose them behind a wave or in the sun glare. Any moment could be our last sight. Then, to our amazement, they came over to the ship. There were a pair of them, and repeatedly they approached the ship, following in our quarter wake, swimming in front of the bow along either side of us. They were about 15 feet long with spindle-shaped bodies, a moderately sloping melon, which is analogous to what we call our forehead, and a medium-length beak. The jawline was relatively straight, but with a slight arch toward the back. And the dorsal fin was set back about 2/3 of the way along the back. The dorsal fin was falcate and wide-based, low and triangular. The overall coloration was medium gray with some mottling likely associated with sloughing skin. There was no distinct color patterning around the face. In total, we spent just over 40 minutes with them at the surface. We got fantastic looks, thousands of photos, and this great video footage. Here are some still photos of these animals. In this photo, you can see the water droplets associated with the blow of the animal as it surfaces. Here is a great look at the head, the beak, the jawline. Here is the dorsal fin and the mottled skin. And here the eye, just above the waterline. You can also see the dimple in the top of the head where the blowhole is. And the yellow colored spots you see are patches of diatoms growing on the skin. This is fairly common for beaked whales and other whales in high latitudes. And as we were intensely watching the whales, at times it seems that they may have been intensely looking back at us. But despite their inquisitive behavior, these close approaches during a prolonged period of time, and the fact that we had the world's best beaked whale authorities on board as part of our science team, we were unable to determine what species they were. And that's because these were sub-adult animals. You remember, for most beaked whales, if they are not adult males, all of them look pretty much the same. But our expedition team does not give up easily. Standing on the bow with crossbow in hand, Bob took aim and fired a 2-foot-long lightweight dart at one of the whales. And here you can see that dart on its way toward the target, the upper back of the animal, just in front of the dorsal fin. By the way, that red wound you see near the top of the animal, that's a relatively fresh cookie cutter shark bite. Now, Bob has collected thousands of these samples from all kinds of whales, dolphins, and porpoises around the planet, and this dart hit its mark. Here, you can see it just before it landed in the water, and that tiny pink bit at the tip of the dart is a pencil eraser-sized piece of skin and blubber of our mystery whale. The DNA contained in that biopsy sample held the key to this species identification. We were at sea for just one more day. Then we returned to Newport, unpacked the Pacific Storm, and all of us returned to our respective homes and workplaces all across the country. But the science continued. The very first thing we took from the Pacific Storm was that biopsy sample. It went straight to our Cetacean Conservation and Genomics Laboratory here in the Marine Mammal Institute, and Scott Baker and Debbie Steele immediately went to work. 5 days later, we had our answer. Our mystery whales were Hubb's beaked whale. The Latin name is Mesoplodon carlhubbsi. And our biopsied whale was a female. So let me take a moment to put this into perspective. In 1945, an American ichthyologist described a beaked whale found alive in the surf near his office in La Jolla, California. The skull and color pattern were different from any whale previously known to science. And that animal ultimately became recognized as a new species, Hubb's beaked whale. But for the next 50 years, it would be known only from specimens found dead on beaches. Fast forward to 1994, the NOAA research vessel Surveyor was conducting a marine mammal survey off the coast of Oregon, when the science team, which included Robert Pittman, who was a part of our own expedition and who collected our own biopsy sample, Bob spotted a group of Hubb's beaked whales that were identified by the unique color pattern of the adult male. That was the first and only time this species had ever been identified alive in the wild, and it would not be identified alive again until our project last September. Meanwhile, acousticians, including our acoustics lead, Jay Barlow, were busy listening to the oceans and recording beaked whale signals. One of these was a distinctive and unique signal previously recorded in 2016 and was named BW37V in a paper published in 2019. And it was on the day of our extraordinary encounter with that pair of mystery beaked whales that our acoustics team recorded that call again. That call, BW37V, we now know is Hubb's beaked whale. Linking an acoustic call with a visual description of a poorly known whale and confirming the species identification through genetics, that's an extremely powerful tool. Instantly, we now know a lot more about the at-sea distribution of this rare whale. It occurs everywhere that call, BW37V, has been recorded. And this map shows you where scientists have listened for those calls. The filled circles and squares are where Hubb's beaked whale has been recorded. The open circles and squares are where we have listened for it, but not heard them. We now know that Hubb's beaked whale is concentrated in temperate waters of the Eastern Pacific based on where we've heard that distinct call. And Hubb's beaked whale is not found in the Central Pacific because we've listened for it and not heard it. Science often, most often, is part serendipity. What I haven't told you so far is that our initial goal for our expedition was to reach the infamous garbage patch in the Eastern Pacific Gyre, way far into the vast Pacific. Not because we wanted to study garbage, but because there were records of a cryptic beaked whale seen there. Unfortunately, engine transmission problems forced us to return to Newport. Our incredibly skilled crew were able to complete repairs in short order, and we used our remaining sea time to explore the offshore waters of Oregon. It turns out that we solved a mystery in our own backyard, although perhaps only oceanographers and fishermen would consider 200 miles to be our backyard. But this adversity, challenge, risk, camaraderie, and occasionally extraordinary discovery. This is why I became a marine scientist. Our research was a collaboration between the Marine Mammal Institute of Oregon State University and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And I want to make a special acknowledgement here. How many of you in the audience have seen these license plates around the state of Oregon? It's a beautiful piece of art representing a gray whale female and her calf. And for every plate sold or renewed, our Marine Mammal Institute receives $35 to support our research, education, and outreach. And our beaked whale expedition that I've just told you about was supported in part by these funds. Without them, our research would not have been possible. Last September's expedition was a fantastic success, an awesome example of local research here in Oregon with global impact. And those whales that have never been seen alive in the wild, they are still out there, maybe some of them in Oregon waters. And we are working hard to plan and conduct another expedition to search for them next fall. So please watch this space. And thank you again for the invitation and for joining me here for my presentation tonight.
Great, thank you so much, Doug. It's all you. Doug's gonna give a very quick presentation and then we're gonna go into Q&A with Dr. Ballance.
Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Thank you, Dr. Ballance. You fed my hunger to learn new things about the wonders of nature. That was really fantastic. And thanks everyone else for joining us on this Wild Wednesday today. My name is Doug Hyken, and I have worked for Oregon Wild in our Eugene office for almost 30 years, mostly advocating for forest conservation, commenting on timber sales, and defending our bedrock environmental laws. But here at Oregon Wild, we like to keep our eyes on the horizon for emerging threats. And I'd like to bring people's attention to a potential threat to marine mammals. The Oregon legislature wants to see 3 gigawatts of wind energy off the coast of Oregon, which sounds great until you understand some of the details and how little we know about the potential impacts to wildlife such as birds and whales. Let me paint a little picture of what this might look like. 3 gigawatts of energy is equivalent to 2 big dams on the Columbia River. For instance, Bonneville Dam plus McNary Dam. Imagine pushing that out and floating it on the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Oregon. And if we build very large turbines, they can generate about 12 megawatts each. So that would require 250 of these 12 megawatt turbines to get to that 3 gigawatt goal. And that might be, set up as 5 clusters of 50 turbines, plus 5 or so offshore substations, which are like floating factories out there. Now, all this may occur within an important whale migration corridor, which brings me to my big concern, which is this huge network of undersea cables which are required to support this effort, and the uncertainty of how this might affect whales and other wildlife. These turbines will be built in very deep water, 400 to 1,000 feet deep, too deep to be directly supported on the seafloor. So there would be floating turbines tethered to the seafloor. And each turbine needs multiple anchors to distribute the load, which requires more than 600 anchors in total for the 250 turbines. And the anchor cables have to be 4 to 8 times longer than the depth of the water to provide some movement and flexibility. That means more than 700 miles of anchor cables, plus 350 miles of power cables submerged, but floating in the water column so they don't break under their own weight and so they can flex when the turbines move around. So in total, that's 1,000 miles of cables, most of which is suspended in the water column and all within a critical whale migration corridor. So whales, we're afraid, could become entangled. Whales don't have a reverse gear as far as we know, so they instinctively twist to free themselves from that entanglement. And that might just make the entanglement even worse, in which case they could drown, which would be quite unfortunate. Now, these floating turbines are also assembled in port. They're not assembled out at sea, they're assembled in port and then floated out to sea, so it requires very unique port facilities, which don't exist in Coos Bay or Brookings or anywhere near these call areas in Southern Oregon that the federal government is talking about. So it would require building up port facilities and dredging shipping channels, which would require another set of economic costs and environmental impacts. And another problem is that floating wind is far more expensive than offshore wind that's built in shallow water, where they can have solid foundations anchored to the seafloor. And it's way, way more expensive than onshore wind or onshore solar. So, so the costs of this may not make sense, but they're still pushing it. Now, I have to credit Mike Graybill, who is retired former director of the South Slough Estuary Reserve, for providing most of the information that I just sent you. Now, I want to be clear that climate change requires that we develop renewable energy like this. We must decarbonize our economy, and that might require accepting some impacts to our oceans and marine mammals. We have to reduce the effects of global climate change, which will have great environmental benefits that are consistent with the public interest and with Oregon Wild's mission, frankly. But we've been thinking about some key principles that should guide decision makers as they venture into this new arena. The first of which is we need a rational energy policy. Right now, the Republicans have gone along with this all of the above strategy so that we're basically getting the worst of fossil fuels plus a huge footprint from renewable energy. And the research shows that so far, alternative energy is not displacing fossil fuel use. So the increased energy supply is just leading to more demand. And we somehow need to develop a way so that renewable energy developments like this are linked to concrete steps to phase out fossil fuels. Second, we need to minimize the ecological footprint of renewable energy. Energy developments and transmission, they take up space that are occupied by natural systems that sustain us. And we need to keep that to an absolute minimum. It's much easier to see the ecological footprint of renewable energy that's built on land, but the impacts of ocean energy are just as real, and we can't ignore that. Another important tool that we have is to focus on location. We made some huge mistakes with wind energy when it was first developed. We put wind energy in places that killed thousands and thousands of raptors. We don't want to repeat that mistake when we're developing ocean energy. Hopefully we can get the answers to some of these important questions before we commit to developing huge offshore wind infrastructure. The federal government has pointed out that whale entanglement is a real concern. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management admits that, quote, entanglement is a significant impact of concern related to offshore floating wind farm installation. There is no applicable scientific information available to inform the potential entanglement risk and impacts from offshore floating wind turbine mooring systems. So there's a lot of momentum moving in the direction of development, but not enough investment in the research that we need to answer these kinds of questions. And finally, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management that I just mentioned, they're taking public comment right now on large call areas off the Oregon coast with more than 1,800 square miles, one large one off of Coos Bay and a slightly smaller one off of Brookings. And the comments are due on June 28th. So and their goal is to have lease auctions in 2024. And there's a lot of pressure within the government to hold these lease auctions because they're afraid they're going to lose a lot of revenue from holding offshore oil and gas leases. And they want to replace that with offshore, wind and wave energy. So, we're afraid they're going to be pushing it maybe for the wrong reasons before thinking it through. So thanks a lot for listening to my TED Talk.
Great, thank you, Doug. And just to address some of Doug's concerns, my first question for Dr. Ballance is, we understand you've received a substantial federal grant to study marine mammals in the area where offshore wind may be deployed off the southern Oregon coast. Can you tell us about your studies and how they may inform decisions about offshore wind development?
Yes, thanks for that question, Allie. It's interesting that Doug spoke about offshore wind energy off Oregon on the evening that I was also speaking, not about that, but yes, we recently, I'm the principal investigator on a project that the Department of Energy is funding for us to the tune of $2 million to collect new information on distribution and abundance of marine mammals and seabirds along the Oregon coast and south down to Cape Mendocino. So our study area is basically from the coast, right from the shoreline, seaward to the edge of the continental slope, right where the slope meets the abyssal plain of the ocean. And we will collect information for the next 2 years based on surveys aboard our Pacific Storm during each of 3 of the 4 seasons. We can't collect data visually in winter because it's just too rough. Visual methods are not effective. But we will also be deploying bottom-mounted hydrophones to listen for marine mammals. We can hear all kinds of species in addition to the beaked whales that I talked about just now. And we are also going to work from small boats and put some of these satellite tags on large whales to find out about their movement and behavior patterns, and really to study about residence. How tightly localized are they to a given area? Once our 2 years of research are complete, we are going to analyze those newly collected data and synthesize them with significant historical data from a variety of sources on distribution and abundance of marine mammals here. And we will produce density maps. One map for that study area for every single species, and in some cases for populations or distinct populations that are recognized under the Endangered Species Act and the Marine Mammal Protection Act. So the goal is to produce a series of these maps for every species that occurs here, not only marine mammals, but also seabirds. And those maps will help to provide information about density and diversity hotspots for these species, and hopefully allow the wind energy industry to make informed decisions about where those platforms might be sited so that the impacts on or the overlap with marine mammals and seabirds would be lesser. That's the general idea of the project.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, super important work. Doug, we are getting a few questions about how people can provide comments. So if you could very briefly say something to that, that would be great.
If you go to BOEM.gov, there's a huge, government webpage, and in there, I think you click on renewable energy, and then you click on local projects or state projects, and you click on Oregon, and it opens up this page where it explains the project. And I got to say that call areas are not lease areas. They're basically seeking information, on whether or not there's corporate interest in investing billions of dollars in this kind of wind development. And right now they're taking public comment on, are these the right places, more or less. So Oregon Wild might do an alert at some point between now and the deadline in late June. But right now, all I can tell you is go to boem.gov. And if you dig in there, you can find it.
Great, thanks, Doug. And then more questions for you, Dr. Ballance. So you mentioned that young women could hear the sound of the beaked whale and maybe not others. Could you go into that a little more?
Sure. There are two factors at play here. One is that for all of us, all humans, both males and females, we all, our hearing gets less acute as we age. So that's not a surprise to anyone. And that loss of hearing is more exacerbated for those of us who have been around loud noises for work purposes or recreational purposes. That damage does accumulate over time, and it affects our hearing. So the older we are, the less well we are able to hear. But also females have more acute hearing, especially at higher frequencies than males. And it's an interesting, perhaps coincidence, that in this field of marine mammal acoustics, it seems to be dominated by females, but females and young females definitely have better, more acute sense of hearing.
Makes sense. Thank you for that. My next question is, how do you donate without getting a new license? You mentioned that car license, and then does the public have access to the OSU Marine building?
Oh, yes. Great questions. Thank you for that. Yes, I'm so grateful to the license plates, and I love seeing the gray whale license plates. And in addition, the Marine Mammal Institute we are so fortunate to have a group of really engaged constituents, stakeholders, just general public that watch what we do, that engage and support what we do in a variety of ways, including philanthropy. You can donate to us through our website. We have a specific page, and it's really easy to do. And I call these philanthropists our MMI friends. And if anyone does donate, even just a very small amount of money, it makes a big difference. It helps us do our research, change the future through education of graduate students, and we add you to our list of MMI friends, so you get a monthly newsletter and hear all about what we do. With respect to the new building here, the Gladys Valley Marine Studies building, you bet, absolutely. It is a public space. It is open to the public. We have a beautiful lobby space, a nice coffee shop with some nice breakfast and lunch items. Everyone from the public is welcome to come in. There's a fireplace. You can sit, meet your friends, have coffee. We have rotating art exhibits. There's a beautiful one in there right now. So yes, by all means, I please encourage anyone to come in and give us a visit.
Great, thanks. I'll have to check it out next time I'm on the coast. So the next question is, if you could say anything about what experience of beaked whales have coastal indigenous people shared. I don't know if you've heard anything about this or not.
I love that question. It's a really intriguing question. And I have no doubt that indigenous peoples did historically and perhaps still come across stranded beaked whales. And I don't know much more than that. I would love to dig into the history of what is available through traditional ecological knowledge in that context, but it's a great question. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, that would be super fascinating.
Yes, indeed.
And then these two questions, I'm gonna try to put them together because they're related to the actual slides. This first one, I think, relates to that tracking data that you showed. And do you see any movement that goes across the Pacific to Asia or south past Baja to South America?
Yes, okay. That was for the animation that I showed of humpback whale tracks. And humpback whales typically, like most large baleen whales, they migrate between tropical latitudes and high latitudes, either in the north or the south. They mate and give birth in low latitudes in the tropics, and they feed in high latitudes. So for that reason, we don't see ocean basin movements east to west very often. It's mostly north to south, and you saw that very clearly in that animation. It is true that humpback whales go down into Central America, farther south than where our animation showed it. But what is also interesting is that these humpback whales are not panmictic, if you will. There is real population structure. So there are certain populations that follow a certain migratory corridor. There are other distinct populations that follow a different migratory corridor. And we could see that quite clearly. If you look at the molecular genetics of those populations, there is distinctness at the genetic level. So quite fascinating.
Awesome, thank you. So the next question is, if we encounter a dead marine mammal on the Oregon coast, should we report this to someone? What type should we report? And also, what should we do if we come across a live marine mammal that is stranded?
Great question. So our very own Jim Rice, the coordinator of the Oregon Marine Mammal Stranding Network, he has his cell phone glued to his hand 24/7. And there's a phone number that you can call, the stranding hotline, if you see a dead marine mammal, and Jim will pick up. You can find that number in a variety of ways. You can just Google Oregon's stranded marine mammals, or you can find it on the Marine Mammal Institute website. Just call that number. Jim will almost certainly pick up, or if he doesn't, you can leave a voicemail and he'll be on it. He's constantly running up and down the coast. He has a small army of volunteers working with him to help respond to stranded animals at the extreme south and north of the state. So that's what you do for dead animals. For live stranded animals, which are even more distressing really than dead stranded animals, there is, you can also call that number. Oregon does not actively rehabilitate stranded pinnipeds, seals and sea lions. For whales and dolphins and porpoises, sometimes the smaller dolphins, you can get them back in the water, but as a general rule, when something comes up on the beach, if it's a whale, dolphin, or porpoise, it's not in good shape and it is going to die. In really bad cases, Jim has the ability to euthanize the animals, and that is actually really helpful for them. Let's see. The other thing, though, that you should definitely do if you come across a live stranded marine mammal, especially if it's a pinniped, a seal or a sea lion, is stay away from it. Because interestingly, sometimes it's fine. Seals and sea lions molt their skin annually. Their hair falls out and they replace it from underneath. And when that happens, they're tired and they're out of energy and they just want to lie on the beach and grow new hair. So it's really important that they just be left alone. And in fact, it's illegal under the Marine Mammal Protection Act to come close to a marine mammal to make it change its behavior. It's certainly illegal to touch it. So best to just stay away. If it's in distress and if it's causing you distress, give Jim a call.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but don't mother seals leave their babies sometimes on the beach and they look like they're abandoned or helpless, but really they're just fine and we should leave them alone?
Yes, absolutely. That's absolutely true. And especially sea lions, the females will go out and feed, and then they come back and their pups continue to nurse for some time. So a lone pup, a pup that's on the beach without its mother, is not necessarily in trouble. Its mother could just be out at sea foraging and will be back soon. So thanks for that clarification, Doug.
Yeah, those are all great points. Thank you. So I'm gonna kind of wrap these two questions into one. What are the biggest threats to beaked whales? And then what are the biggest threats to marine mammals as a group?
Okay, I'll take the first one, beaked whales. And I'll preface this by reminding you, as you saw from my talk, that we don't know much about beaked whales, and we don't know more than we know. We don't know very much. But what we do know is that beaked whales are quite susceptible to certain types of sound, high intensity sounds. And we know this because there have been many reports all across the globe of beaked whales coming ashore alive on beaches in very good shape. They usually die shortly after that. And it turns out that most of those live strandings, and some of them include more than one animal, have been associated with Navy sonar. And so we know that they are very susceptible to that underwater sound. That is definitely a threat. I'll move to marine mammals in general. There are a lot of threats to marine mammals. Frankly, by far the biggest one is entanglement. And mostly it's entanglement in accidental entanglement in fishing gear. That's a problem in the United States, but it's a big problem globally. It's a problem with lost fishing gear. It's a problem with active fishing gear. It's a problem in developing countries. It's a problem with subsistence fisheries. So when we think about big threats to marine mammals, we think about entanglement, and we think about ways to mitigate entanglement. There are some huge success stories along that line where fishing gear can be modified to lessen the entanglement risk, or fishing practices can be changed to lessen the entanglement risk. So there are some success stories, but that entanglement is a big issue. A few of the other big ones, ship strikes. Ship strikes are a big problem especially for large whales. Again, this is a global problem. So there's a lot of research being conducted about how we can mitigate those ship strikes. Another threat that we hear about, but we know a lot less about, is fishing down the food chain. The fact that a lot of the fish that we eat and that are commercially fished are also prey for marine mammals, and the degree to which that competition is negatively impacting marine mammals is largely unknown, but it is a possible threat. Moving to things we know even less about, pollutants. We can detect pollutants in marine mammals through those skin and blubber biopsy samples, like the one that we collected from the Hubb's beaked whale. But the degree to which those pollutants have negative effects on those individuals, and are those effects at a population level, we know a lot less about that. And I think I'll stop there. I could keep going, lots and lots of threats, but those are the big ones.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. Do you have time for one more question? We still have quite a lot of people on. I know we're going over.
Sure, okay. Happy to.
One last one, just because we have so many people still on and interested. Are you seeing changes in the marine ecosystem offshore of Oregon, and especially in the marine mammals that occur here?
Yes. Yes. We are, scientists are, commercial and recreational fisheries I think anyone who spends time on the water would say absolutely they have seen changes in the ocean off of Oregon in their lifetimes. And I'll talk about some likely not so good changes first. And that is changes in the physical characteristics of the water. The water is getting warmer. We're having extensive warm water periods that are moving farther north along the coast and staying longer. Associated with that warm water sometimes is hypoxia, low oxygen levels. We are also seeing changes in the pH of the water, and all of those physical oceanographic changes have biological impacts. With respect to water temperature, we're seeing range shifts. We're seeing different animals here now than we did. Warmer animals that are normally found in warmer waters are increasingly creeping north along the California current. The changes in dissolved oxygen and pH of the water are affecting prey animals, animals that are prey for marine mammals. So we're seeing quite a few changes along those lines. I will also say, I will also talk about a positive change. And I mentioned this in passing during my talk. Marine mammals are protected in the United States by two very strong statutes, the Endangered Species Act and the Marine Mammal Protection Act. Marine mammals were heavily and directly hunted through commercial whaling, the commercial whaling industry in the late 1800s and the 1900s, all the way up through the 1970s in some cases. But under the protection of those two statutes, a lot of marine mammals have been recovering, and they've been recovering extraordinarily. So those of us who live on the coast know that California sea lions are very abundant. In fact, they're as abundant as they probably ever have been in the history of time, in the history of the California current, because they're now protected. Some people would even say there are too many California sea lions, but there are more now than there ever have been. The big whales, blue whales, we have a lot of blue whales off our coast right here now. And that is due to the fact that they've been protected and they have recovered from industrial whaling. And humpback whales are quite common out here now. Fin whales increasingly. Another whale that you may not have heard of, sei whale, we've seen them off the Oregon coast. So they're all recovering from industrial whaling, and it's a huge success story. It means that if we protect these whales, they can recover. So it's that is a happy change we're seeing.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Ballance. I'm gonna wrap it up there. Thank you so much for your time and for the great presentation. Thank you to everyone in our audience for joining. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone else did too. So yes, thank you again, and have a great night, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.